Hi, I'm Brittany Ashley, your host of Breaking Norms, Building Dreams, your guide through this transformative journey in both business and life. This is your place crafted for dreamers, doers, or anyone who has been told they can't. Get ready as we challenge those narratives together. You're tuning in live to the United Public Radio Network, airing on 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. We are streaming on all the popular platforms every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join me for a candid and thought-provoking conversation celebrating your unique journey because you are worth it. Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. I can't get over that we're already on Monday. I'm a little bit disoriented. I'm so excited to have Patricia here today, everyone. Before we dig in, welcome to Breaking Norms, Building Dreams. I'm your host, Brittany Ashley, and we are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Get ready to escape the next hour as we break norms and build dreams with Patricia. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brittany. I cannot wait to dive in.
I'm so excited. I know we have so many questions, and it's just a casual flow of a conversation. So I know I gave you a lot of questions, but please, it's kind of like a guideline for me in case we ever go like, oh my goodness, what is the next question? But let me do a quick introduction to all the listeners and or anyone viewing us today. Patricia helps moms with adult ADHD working with their unique brains to get their ish together, one step at a time, and feel confident running their family life. She hosts Motherhood in ADHD, a top 5 parenting podcast, encouraging mamas with practical strategies and relatable missteps. I'm so excited to dig in more. And I know we have your checklist. So just so everyone's kind of coming in, I'll have your checklist at the bottom and we'll just keep on going there. But maybe you can tell everybody kind of how you started and a little bit more about you.
Oh, well, and it's, I think everyone's story has these twists and turns. You're like, I did not think I was going to end up here. But if I roll back to, I was originally diagnosed back in the year 2000. When I was in college. I was actually at Tulane University in New Orleans. And I just went from a excellent student. I mean, I'm an A+ oldest daughter. I just followed the rules and I did everything I was supposed to do. And then I showed up at college and I literally fell apart. I was on academic scholarship and was in danger of losing it because I was failing out, and just everything was falling apart. And I didn't understand why. I was like, I don't get it. I have done so well to this point and I always did exactly what I needed to do. And now it's not working. And thankfully, a wonderful doctor at the Student Health Center caught what was going on. And she's like, I think you have ADHD. And I was like, what is that? Because back then, girls were not usually diagnosed and it really wasn't talked about. So she said, I think this is what you have. And she sent me to the Student Services Center. And I did a full workup with a lovely lady who was doing her master's. So I got the full shebang of tests.
Wow.
So, I for sure have ADHD. And was able to get myself through college, which, I mean, we can dive in more today, but I'll give you the short version right now. And I just figured out how to duct tape and spitball my way through being a grown-up. And then once I had kids, it really fell apart again, because while I was just responsible for me and I was teaching for many years, I knew how to work with my students, and school is very regimented. So that was really good for me. I had it all together. And then when I all of a sudden had a newborn and there was no schedule and there was no one telling me what to do and I wasn't sleeping, it all fell apart again. And that's when I realized I might need to go back and revisit this. Whereas I had spent the previous 15 years figuring it out on my own, but not telling anybody that that's what I was dealing with.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't anymore. It wasn't feasible. And I was like, there's got to be other people out here who know what this is like and get it. And I started Googling and I couldn't find much. And I was so sad to think this surely isn't the life that I was meant to live. There's got to be other moms out here like me. It can't just be me. Yeah. And that was the beginning of me starting that, hey, if I can't find it, then I need to make it. I need to put it out there. And lo and behold, here I am. I'm like, fast forward, how long ago was that? I started the podcast 6 years ago. Now I have over 1 million downloads. So I'm clearly not the only one.
No.
And it's this, like, you can see all the pieces come together of being a teacher and helping others and running a business, and then putting that all together into, okay, this is actually a way that I can help people in a tangible way. And I want moms to know that you're not the only one, and you can be successful, and it just looks differently than everyone else is doing.
I love that. Well, you and I were just talking before you even just got onto the show too. Like, where did Breaking Norms, Building Dreams came about? And really, at the end of the day, I was diagnosed with dyslexia at age 6, but I was not diagnosed with ADHD. I'm self-diagnosed with ADHD after having multiple researchers on the show being like, Brittany, you probably I'm like,
look into that.
Now that I've like been researching so much more, I have the understanding that dyslexia and ADHD kind of overlap a little bit.
They're friends, yes.
And so I'm like, it makes so much sense why Brittany's always going 200 miles a minute, doing 600 different things. No one can ever catch up to me. Like, I just had this conversation with somebody last week, and they're like, I was digging into your everything that you do, and I'm like, well, how does she do it? I don't know some days.
Powered by ADHD, that's how you do it.
It's my superpower. But on that premise of where did the show come from? That's why I wanted you on the show. I named it Breaking Norms, Building Dreams. One, because I was getting tired of being put in a box, being told that I was not allowed to be in an organization because they couldn't give me extra time to do my exams. Like, I suck at exams. Like, I'm already have anxiety with exams, like all the things. And so I did psychology testing to get approved of getting extra hours of all these things. And then I've been told, like, into this other program, no, you can't have it. And it's like, well, that's unethical. Part of your trade is to be ethical. And so that's why I was like, I won't say the name of the company, but it's just kind of where I'm like, well, that doesn't sit well with me. I'm getting tired of being told no. And my whole life, I was always told no. Like, when I did my marketing communications, I have so many diplomas and degrees. I pretty much got pulled aside from the teacher being like, you're not allowed to be in this program because you have dyslexia. And I was like, what? That's just so taken back. So the premise of the whole show is we are worthy of whatever we want to pursue. So that's kind of building dreams. And then breaking norms. I like to talk about societal norms like ADHD, because everyone has their kind of stigma, motherhood stigma. So let's break it down and educate people more on what society might think and how we can change that prerogative a little bit. So that's the whole premise of why I started the show and why I'm so excited to have you on the show to dig in more about ADHD today.
Yeah. And that's a really good pairing with what I do, because I have always said from the beginning, my goal is to change the paradigm of how ADHD is looked at, because it does have so many stereotypes that come with it that are not necessarily true. And they're for sure not true for everyone. And that's, I think, one of the hardest parts about ADHD is that it shows up so differently for so many people that it's hard to nail down. So it's hard to know that that's the thing you're dealing with. But you also have, like, you might have someone who has ADHD and dyslexia, and they're going to struggle with this area. And then with the right supports, they'll still be able to function in that role. But if you come to somebody else and they'd be like, well, that support didn't actually help me any because I'm dealing with ADHD and this other thing. And so they need a different set of supports. So when we're looking at everyone as, well, if we could just put everyone with ADHD in this box and then we would know how to diagnose them, that's not how this works. And that is where it is such a struggle for people to, one, get identified, and then two, to find the right supports. And then, layer in the fact that there's a lot of people who don't understand what accommodations are and how we can support people to even the playing field, so that, like, that's not giving you an advantage to have extra time. That's allowing you to function so that you can meet the standards that everyone else is meeting more easily. And there's so many people who think like, well, that's not fair. Why do you get that? And it's like, if you had any idea how hard people with learning disabilities or chronic illness or whatever's going on is, how much they're struggling and how hard they're working to just meet the basic levels, then you wouldn't say that. But it's a lot easier when you see somebody's disability on the outside than when you can't see it and put a visible like identifier to it.
Yeah.
And that's why you and I do the work we do.
Yeah. It's like just you saying that. Like I remember I'd be so scared, and I'm going like back in time now, like even further. When I was diagnosed, like I didn't want to tell anybody. To be honest, really, I've been a lot more vocal about it in the last few years because it's a lot of trauma for me. And so like, I don't want to bring this up because I'll cry. I don't want to bring this up because of X, Y, and Z, like flashbacks for me. And like the biggest thing was school. Like I just think back to it. I was like, I love school, but I also hated it.
Yeah.
Because there's those preconceptions, unfortunately, with a lot of people, teachers. There's a lot of great teachers out there. I wouldn't have been able to get through school because of some of the great teachers that kind of built their, like, helped me to get forward. But I had to push back on so many of the negative ones that I remember, like, I might have shared this story in the past shows. I can't remember. Memory loss. But one of my teachers would put on my document that I was too stupid to go into calculus. So I was from middle school going into high school, from 9 to 12, and then you graduate. And for anybody, because I know the school systems are slightly different for everybody. So I was leaving my middle school to high school, and I got put randomly in calculus, math, and I got pulled out in front of everybody. I like remember this.
Ugh.
With the door open, like I remember, and then I was just like, kind of like, there's the principal, there's the teacher. Like I was just like, what? Did I get in trouble? Why am I getting pulled out? And I remember them being like, well, we was looking at your file, and we were your teacher in middle school that you did math with, said that you should probably be in a central. So that's considered, like, people call it like the dumb class. So we need to pull you out. And my teacher at that time, I remember his name, love him, Mr. Grennis. I actually am really good friends with his daughter. He's like, what do you want to do? Instead of what they want to do, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to stay here. He's like, let's stay here. And then I had Mrs. Prue being like, let's do what we need to do to make you pass those courses. And I ended up being in calculus from grade 10 and 11. And then I opted out at 12 because I did not want to do like the government exams. But like, that's the thing. If we classify people of just dumb and we're not good enough, we're not even letting those people be worthy of whatever superpower that we don't maybe even know what they have.
Yeah. And that's a lot of, like, we could just solve it by let you try. What's the harm in letting you try? If it doesn't work out, okay, got it. Like, we'll need to switch classes.
Yeah.
But you can't see what someone's capable of if you haven't given them the opportunity to show it.
Yeah.
And how much, like, I just watching your face as you were talking about that teacher who believed in you, like, that is what, I mean, not just that our kids need, but like we as grownups need, is for someone to say, you know what, I believe in you. Let's give it a try. And to put enough faith in you to even let you have the chance.
I think
that's the kind of support we need.
Exactly. I think everyone deserves a chance, a second chance. It's just a matter of I think it's also how we present the questions and be more curious in how we present or even how we show up. Because I think we're kind of sometimes short to just judge or go through all these things. And so how can we be more mindful of switching our mindset or switching our tone to be more accepting, I guess?
And there's so many different ways that people can be gifted and shine. And unfortunately, the way that school systems are set up, which, I mean, having been a former public school teacher, like, I know it's like the system is set up to highlight certain kinds of giftedness. And that's not everything that life's about. We also can have giftedness in so many other ways from the arts to music and athleticism and, you know, the more complex like engineering things that we don't even touch in younger grades enough. Like there's so many different ways that our kids and we as grown-ups can be gifted. And when we only look at the like, well, what's the number grade on this paper? We miss so much of the information that's not communicated in that one singular number.
Yeah. Do you guys do letter grades there?
They do both. So there's numbers, but then they like equal a letter in a different in different ranges.
Yeah.
So
So we did have that, like, I feel like back in the day.
back in the ancient days, the 1900s.
Back in the day, like we had like in your percentage, you get A plus, A minus, da da da. But now what I'm finding out now that my kids are in school, well, one of them at least, the other one's soon enough. We're doing like, are they proficient or not proficient, and kind of put them in that class. At first, I'm kind of on a fence, to be honest, on how I feel about this, because once they get in high school, that's when the grades show up, and then university as well, and college. So I'm like, are we just kind of setting them up to fail in a little bit? Because, and I don't believe in letter grades either, because I know me personally, like I'm doing it as my personal intake. Like I'm like, I need to get an A. I need to get on the honor roll. I need to that was me masking, because I didn't want anyone to know my challenges.
Right.
But I'm kind of on the fence of that. I guess we'll see what happens. I'm an advocate for my kids. Right now my daughter's going to be going through psychology testing and ADHD testing to see, because it is hereditary. I like to catch it earlier than later, and making sure that she or my son has that support needed when they get once in the school system, because unfortunately you can get lost in the school system.
Very much so. And the hard part is like, it's such a double-edged sword, is that when you have a teacher who really understands and is willing to work with you, and they know that that's what you're struggling with, they're going to offer so much more support. And then unfortunately there's other places where they're like, well, if you need extra support, too bad, so sad, that like, we're not doing that. And it also can be a big stigma for kids. So it's hard, because you want it to be there when they need it. And also knowing that there are some people who are going to judge you no matter what. And you can't change what other people perceive or see, as much as we sure wish we could. We can't. And so it's just so hard to know, like, what's the right answer for our kids, and how do we set them up better than we had.
Exactly. I find, I know you mentioned, let's just go back, because I know you mentioned like stereotypes a little bit there of like, because really a lot end up just hyper focusing on boy children for ADHD. And we as women kind of got lost along the way, I would say. And everyone's like, oh, it's because of TikTok, or it's because of social media, of why everyone's like, I have ADHD, and at the end of the day, it's called probably science, that everything's coming out, and we're starting to evolve and understand more of why we're doing certain things behind the scenes, and know that that's, I don't want to say like it's classified underneath ADHD.
Yeah. So the more that I spend time with my people who have ADHD, the more that I'm shifting my perspective on it. And I don't necessarily think that it's just male, female. I think there's more nuance to it. And what it is that when you have let me back up for a second. So ADHD has 3 different types. There's the hyperactive side, which to me, I like to call them like the more external symptoms, where they're more visible to everyone else around you. Then you have the inattentive side, which are more of the internal symptoms that aren't as visible. And then you have the combined type, so both. Oh. And when you have the hyperactive side, or combined, because that includes hyperactive, everyone around you starts to notice, because a lot of characteristics of ADHD are considered annoying, or you're struggling in school, like those things that are obvious, and people are like, ooh, wow, that person is really struggling, we should help them. Or wow, this person is driving me bonkers, we should do something about that. So when we have those external symptoms, those people get caught and noticed earlier. Whereas those of us who have the more inattentive side, those things can go unnoticed and people don't realize you're struggling as much as you are. So that doesn't get the attention of other people to see like, oh, wow, that person really needs help. So it's not necessarily just male, female, but generally speaking, women tend to have more of these internal or inattentive symptoms than males. So it is easier for us to fly under the radar, to figure out how to mask just the way that we are socialized, to figure it out and make it work and pay attention to details. Those things are ingrained in us more so as women. And if you're a guy, like you usually have people in your life who will help you with those things, like your mom or your wife or your executive assistant. And you have that support there for you. When you are the person who's supposed to be doing these jobs that are detail oriented, which tends to be more of a female job, like being a mom or a wife or an executive assistant, you don't have someone to outsource these things to. So you have to struggle so much more to get there. And so I think there are actually quite a few men who have the inattentive that have not been diagnosed, but I think it's easier for them to have the supports in place as opposed to women who tend to have more of the inattentive symptoms and they don't have someone to outsource those things to. Like and I wish that it wasn't that stereotypical thing, but it's like how many dads are like, I don't know who my kid's doctor is or when the permission slips are due. Like that's mom's job. And so we don't get to be like, well, I'll just hand that off to who am I handing that to? Nobody. I have to figure out where the permission slip is. And I'm the one who lives with the guilt with the fact that I forgot to give it to my kid signed and they can't go on on the field trip. Like that tends to be more of a female issue. So given all that, generally speaking, women will tend to fly under the radar more because our symptoms tend to be not a nuisance and not as obvious. So that like spectrum of, if you will, of symptoms is so different for everyone. And I'm like, did I even answer the question? I got on my soapbox about, I'm like, did I answer the question? This is where my ADHD shows up and I'm like, ooh, was I listening? Did I pay attention?
No.
It's supposed to be answering.
It was perfect. No, I like that perspective though. And I never even thought of it that way, to be honest, the more that you're thinking of that, like just speaking on that, I was like, oh, I forgot about the agenda book again for the 6th time.
Yes. And so I just think there are so many people who have inattentive ADHD and have no idea. There are just so many. And like when you were talking earlier about it being hereditary, it's like, okay, studies show that there's about 2.5% to 5% of people have ADHD, but that's the people who've been diagnosed. How many more people are not diagnosed? My guess it's probably closer to about 10%. So if you say general population is 10% of people have ADHD. Now compare that to when you have ADHD, your kids actually have like a 50 to 70% chance of having ADHD. And if both parents have it, it goes up even higher. So you then create family systems full of people with diagnosed or undiagnosed ADHD. And it just is like this snowball effect of people struggling who are in families with people who are also struggling. And it is so much more difficult when nobody in the family has any skills to lean on. And a lot of times they don't even know.
They don't know. And then I feel like because it's kind of in a way, still people don't want to talk about it because they're ashamed. And I feel like, and that's why I think I love talking about this so much on the show, is that we don't need to be ashamed. From ADHD to autism, because I'm bringing that in a little bit here. I feel like I think in a way, society has made it very shameful. So when we bring it up, then it hurts us to even bring it up because you don't know how you're going to get judged. So like going back to the full circle of why I started the show is to educate. And I don't know half the things for ADHD or autism, but the one thing I do know is that I want to educate myself enough or educate myself more so I can be more prepared to help my kids out or just to help spread the word a little bit more of a nicer tone than just being so negative. Because I find it's gotten a lot better as years has come through. People are wanting to take those narratives and make it a little bit more softer. But I find that unfortunately, like if you get on the wrong side of TikTok, like it's just downhill.
Yeah, and having any kind of neurodiversity or excuse me, like a chronic illness or a any kind of mental health things, like a lot of these things bring up shame because we're taught that we're supposed to be able to do everything on our own. We're supposed to be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and figure it out and do more and, be more productive and be more efficient. And when you struggle, enters that shame of like, well, but I'm supposed to be able to do this. And
Mhm.
there are so many people who their ADHD is truly a disability. It is life altering. They can't hold down a job. They struggle with their relationship. Like there's so many pieces of ADHD that can be really hard.
Mhm.
And it is my personal opinion that when you have the right supports in place, you don't have to struggle as much. It's not to say that you're not going to struggle at all. But I think when we look at a lot of times, like we see these, big celebrity names of like, well, so and so has ADHD and they're fine, the, the Richard Bransons of the world and like all these like multi-billionaire and like, TV show and the celebrity, like all of these people who are like, wow, you look at them and you're like, wow, they seem to not struggle at all. And they have figured out to make like how to make this their superpower. And I have a very like love-hate relationship with the word superpower because when we only focus on the superpower side, a lot of times we don't give validity to the struggle.
Mhm.
And yet, if all we do is focus on how hard this is, we don't look for the strengths and we don't think we can do better. So we have to have both pieces in
Mhm.
the mix of, yes, recognizing that when you have ADHD, you probably also have a colorful rainbow of assorted other friends that come along with it. And it's not always easy. And that when we can put the right supports in place, it can be okay. Like it can get to a point where you're like, I can function, I can hold on my job, I can do great things. And we can see that because there are people who have figured out how to make it work. And obviously, like, side note, we don't know that their life is perfect. They may be a billionaire. That doesn't mean they have a great family life, or they may look cute on TV, but that doesn't mean they don't have, anorexia. Like, we don't know everything else that's going on with them. But
Mhm.
to know that there is a way with the right supports in place to make it work for you, that what I want for people who are like, maybe this is me or this is me, like there is a way to make things better. You don't have to struggle that hard. It's not going to be a cakewalk. But I don't think anybody in life gets a cakewalk. I don't think there's anybody anywhere who's like, wow, this is the easiest thing I've ever done. Being a human, piece of cake, totally like, I don't
Mhm.
know why people complain about. No, that's not a real life thing. Everybody has struggles. Everybody has things going on. So how do we take the things that you've been dealt and make it easier for you?
My rule of thumb is we all have strengths, but let's also know the weaknesses. And then how can we build a proper system to support those weaknesses?
Mhm.
And I really, really, any employers listening out there, feel like we need to start taking that into kind of our forte moving forward all the time because you just don't know. Sure, they might look great on paper, but they might be struggling in certain areas, ADHD, and you just don't know. Like, I personally hate answering the phones because if they tell me how to spell their name over the phone, my brain's like, oh my goodness, I
Blah,
can't.
blah, 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 blah. Oh, that's what they said. Lovely. Yeah, I'm very similar to that. I really struggle with auditory processing. It's
Yeah.
hard.
And I never realized that was probably interconnected
Mhm.
with my learning disability. Because I started off as administration and I just struggled. But you know what? If I had the proper systems to get me through it, it wouldn't be so scary. Like I had severe anxiety answering the phones. Um, I and like even just looking at like general 9 to 5, I was like, ugh, no wonder I didn't fit in.
Yeah, and there are so many and I know I understand it's hard to tailor jobs to every single person, but yet we hired an individual to be in this job. We didn't hire a like faceless pile of people to do the job. So
Mhm.
when we can, when we are able to create an environment where different people can function, it's like,
Mhm.
you know what? There's probably a lot of things that this person's very good at that you could use as their strengths. And then the more we can take the pieces off that they're not good at and find someone else who is really good at that.
Yeah.
So, like, for me, I am very administratively gifted, and that's not most people with ADHD hate admin work.
Mhm.
But like you said, like answering the phone, like when somebody repeats their phone number, I'm like, one number at a time, please. like, like a string of numbers, that is like my worst nightmare.
Yes.
Please don't. And so there's plenty of things that I'm good at. So like if you need 7 ideas of how we're going to solve this problem, I'm your girl. But if you want me to write down 7 phone numbers, I'm like,
Not my.
there's someone else more qualified for this. But to me, like coming up with new ideas is way easier than copying down phone numbers. And most people will be like, all you need me to do is just write down numbers. Like that's nothing.
Yeah. But like my
Yeah.
brain just can't comprehend. Like I'm better if I've noticed if someone's like 38, 85,
Mhm.
like got it. But if you're 3, 8, like what? Back it up. My brain got lost in the land of 3.
Oh yeah. When we get to the end of phone number, I'm still writing down the area code.
Yeah.
I have not even gotten to the second section of numbers and they've already finished talking. I'm like, nope.
But on that point, like we don't have to like employers are probably like, oh, what do you mean I have to do another thing? But the thing where I'm at saying is just ask more curious questions. And that's what I do with my team. I have a team of amazing women across Canada, and we all specialize in different areas. And I take the time to understand, and a lot of us are neurodivergent.
Mhm.
And I just love it because I'm a visionary. I think of strategy, and then we have somebody else who just really loves more of the admin and executive assistant stuff and thrives on that. And we make such a full elite team that makes us like powerful. And so that's what I'm just trying to say for anybody listening is you don't have to change up your whole model, but if you take the time to listen and take your time to ask those extra curious questions, then just assume you're just such you're just going to move that needle in further with your team. And I like my team to know that I'm there with them, I'm learning aside with them, and I don't want it to be ever look like I'm like too good to not learn.
Mhm.
That's just, like that's my leadership style too.
Yeah.
I'm in the trenches because I want to learn and I want to know what they're struggling with, how I can also assist with navigating that with them.
And sometimes those supports are just so easy. Like you said, if you say 38, that's so much easier than 38. So it's
Mhm.
like how easy is it to be like, okay, well then I'll just say like 387 instead of 387? Like that's not like a huge toll on your system. And most people who struggle with things, like I would say probably 80% of the time, they know a thing that's going to make it easier. So if you just ask and I say, "Hey, can you just repeat the numbers like a larger number, like 387 versus 387?" Like that's not like we're not asking for like, "Oh, well, hire me a personal assistant to write all my numbers for me." No, like
Mhm.
the simplest things can make a really big difference.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and sometimes it's literally no extra time, no extra effort.
Mhm.
It's just the fact that you cared enough to try.
Mhm. Yes, 100%. We're already past the midway point. Um, so for anyone just listening,
We're having so much fun. I'm like, "Ooh, already 3:40.
I know, right?
Own it."
You're listening to Breaking Arms, Building Dreams, and we're live on United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. I know I told you it was going to go by really fast. I find like so many people are scared, like a full hour. How are we going to talk for a full hour? I'm like, don't worry, I make it fun. I swear.
Okay, I can talk for 2 hours. When I'm with my people and I'm talking about things that I'm passionate about, I could go all day.
Amazing. Well, that kind of leads into my next question on motherhood and ADHD. Maybe you can share some personal stories of kind of what you felt was a bit of a struggle, and I can share mine too.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple areas where I really struggle being a mom and having ADHD. One of them is for me, time blindness is a really tough struggle. I have no concept of time, and it truly is like a blindness for me. I don't know what time it is. I don't know how long things take. I don't have an internal clock. And when you're a parent, you are usually in charge of getting people to school on time or lessons or getting people to bedtime at a certain time. And that ability to just know how long things take or how much time has passed. I don't have that skill. I didn't get that gene when I was born. Like, I don't know. So that is a really big struggle for me. But as a parent, that means things like we are running behind, which means I'm getting frustrated and they're getting frustrated and everybody starts yelling at each other because I messed up and I didn't give us enough time. And I think that we can just magically appear places and my brain doesn't calculate like, oh, you know what? It's going to take 10 minutes to convince my 7-year-old to put on shoes.
Mhm.
And then another 5 minutes to get in the car because we already forgot 3 things. We got to circle back. And the drive. And oh, look, when we get there, we have to park and we have to go through this building to find the place. That's another 5 minutes. My brain calculates none of that. My brain's like, oh, I got to be there at 4:00. Cool. I could probably buzz out of here at like 3:50, right? No, that's not humanly possible. And so as a parent, the guilt and shame that comes with messing things up and being late or forgetting about things because oh my gosh, it's actually already 4:20 and we haven't even left the house. Like, that is such a big piece of my parenting that I have to work so hard on. And I have to put things in place like I'm like, I can't say her name because she'll start talking at me, but the Alex that is to my side here, like, she keeps us on schedule in the morning. She's like, it's time to brush your teeth. It's time to get your backpack, because I am not the person to be in charge of that. Like, don't put me in charge. So I have places that I put support in place so that I don't have to beat myself up about what I'm not good at. I figure out how to make it work and then rely on those things to support me. So time blindness is like in the top 3. I'm like, do you want to share one or should I keep going?
I can definitely relate on that. I'm like, I would say I'm pretty good because I have a lot of anxiety being late.
Mm-hmm.
But with kids, like, I can't plan that. Like putting on shoes, I'm like, oh, I know it's taking so long. So what I've been doing for myself is mapping times a bit better in my calendar. So if they can't afford anything, maybe you just have a free Google account, set up Gmail and connect it to your phone for anyone listening. I map things out in my calendar, or as soon as I book something, I put it in there because once it's
Yeah.
in there, I know it's in there. Then if it's not in my brain, like, it's gone. Like, I might forget. Like,
So
for example, like, we had a counseling appointment booked. I know I did this. And because I have my system down, I put it in the calendar. And for whatever reason, my gut was like, go check the calendar. I'm going to guess maybe I didn't press like book now. But it was all in my calendar. I was ready to go and realized I didn't really book anything. But, at least the calendar kind of like notifies you. You can set it for anyone listening to remind you that something significant's coming. But I would say I'm a mix of time blindness. It depends. Like, when I'm like hyper focused in a project doing client work, I can spend hours on it and forget what time it is. And like, oh my goodness, there's the day.
Yep. Yeah. And the other part that's just so hard is the emotional regulation piece, where being able to react and control, and I don't really like the word control. I try to use the word agency. So having agency over your feelings and knowing that you can choose to be frustrated, or how do you choose to be patient? Like, a lot of times those reactions feel so automatic. It doesn't really feel like a choice. It doesn't feel like I have an option. But in the many years of working with parents, there are times where you're able to be patient. So what is it about those times that allow you to have the capacity to do that? It's usually that you were in a better headspace and you were feeling more patient and you had more capacity. So therefore you had the space to deal with other people's emotions, because our kids, unfortunately, their brains are not fully developed. They don't have a fully developed frontal lobe to be able to do the things that we wish that they could. So they're not able to regulate their emotions as well as a grown-up. And so we have to share our regulation with them. And given that there are times where we can show up as patient, okay, well, we know it's possible. So how do we replicate that when it's those days where you're like, if I have to say, like, get your shoes on one more time, I am going to lose my ever loving mind. Like on those days, how do we connect in and give ourselves capacity to be able to deal with that so that we're not yelling at everyone?
Mhm.
Because that yelling creates a lot of guilt and shame. And that's a lot of times where people won't say that they need help, is
Mhm.
because they don't want to share, like, oh my gosh, like I yelled at my 4-year-old the other day and told them I hated them because I was so mad. People don't want to share that. People don't want to tell other people that they said that or that they did that, because we're not proud of that.
Mhm.
And yet when we talk about it, we find other parents who are like, "Oh, wow, like I've definitely said things to my kid that I regret." And can share examples, and we know it's not us. It's like, "Oh, okay, now I know where to get help."
Mhm.
So this emotional regulation piece would be right up there in the top of the list with the time
Mhm.
blindness.
Yeah, I second that. Like, just thinking of all these different scenarios, I would say too, like, ever since I had my second kid, my emotions are just like,
Yeah.
I would say with this, the first was, I felt like it, I would say more my ADHD came more present after my second, where I'm like, wow, where was this all left before?
Yeah, because you throw in, like, the fact that you're not sleeping as much, all the postpartum hormones, and having multiple kids means a lot more juggling, and 2 people asking you for things, and, like, obviously, like, a newborn's not using words, but, like, they're
Mm,
still asking you of things, and now you're trying to juggle multiple people's requirements and your own,
mhm,
and it's so much more of a load on your mental health, on your well-being, to be able to juggle all of these priorities. And as moms, we usually say, "Well, you know what? If I'm gonna give something up, it's gonna be me. So
mhm,
I'll take care of everyone else first, and then I'll figure out my stuff at the end." And lo and behold, we get to the end and there's nothing left.
yeah,
So that is one of the hardest pieces
mhm,
of parenting for
yeah,
everyone. But then when you have ADHD thrown in on that and the postpartum and the all, it's like, whoo. Yeah,
mhm.
they did not put this in the warning manual before you decided to have children.
No, not at
They
all.
did that memo.
We should have got a memo before all this.
Where was the instruction manual?
Right? Well, that I don't know if I mentioned this, but that's the reason why I started Career Dynamics, to help mom work from home. So a good percentage of us
Mm,
are moms, from
yeah.
2 kids to 1 kid to 5 kids. And so, like, it's not that to say if you come to Career Dynamics and you don't have kids, yes, like if you offer a specialty, like I'm not going to say no. And there's a few on the team that don't have kiddos and they're on the team. Um, but the whole premise for Creative Dynamics, and was my biggest why as a first time mom, I there was like nothing out there that was able to juggle like
Mm,
life,
yeah.
entrepreneurship, or anything like that, or just the 9 to 5. Like my background is in tech, and usually you can work from home.
Yeah.
But really, at the end of the day, sometimes not. And it wasn't flexible. So there's not enough flexibility jobs out there for parents in general. It doesn't matter if you're a mom, it's just for parents in
Yeah.
general. There's not enough out there. And that is the biggest reason why I started this company, is to have, because I know if I was a stay at home mom, I'd go bananas.
Absolutely. I tried. I tried.
I
And
would
it
not.
was so hard. And I think that happens a lot of times. Like, I mean, generally speaking, people who are entrepreneurs tend to have ADHD. Like, we're
Yeah.
significantly more likely as someone with ADHD to start our own companies because we're more comfortable with the risk taking. We're more comfortable with the unknown. We're more comfortable with juggling like the 17 hats that's required. Um, but it is a whole nother ballgame. And I wish that there were more opportunities for parents to be able to figure out how to make this work. I was actually just joking with a friend earlier this morning because our kids have 2 half days this week because it's conference, like mid-year conference time. It's like, how as a working parent do you juggle? Like they're out at 11:30 on Thursday and Friday this week.
Yeah. It boggles my mind, like how, like, sometimes even when I do pickup, like, I just wanna go up to the parents and be like, "What do you do? What do you do?" Because 'Cause I'm like,
How do
"Oh,
you make it work?
seriously, what do you all do?" Because I feel like there's so many that do work 9 to 5, and the amount, like, my one kid's in daycare, and the amount, when they're younger, they're sick a lot more. So
Yes.
you have to call it.
Especially when you have daycare. They
Exactly.
get sick and then they can't go to daycare, which is where they got sick. It's just like,
And last year we had an experience where daycare got is a huge issue. Long story short, we end up not having daycare. And if I was in a 9 to 5, I would have been fired within a week.
yeah.
And that's another thing maybe employers need to do, is having a better grace period, because being a parent is hard and it's unpredictable, unfortunately. And we can't predict how the daycare systems, how all of these systems are in place to help us, don't end up really helping us. So I'm constantly, the kids are home today, but it's because everyone, I'm in Victoria, BC, we get snow once in a lifetime, and today it is snowing, and we don't drive here even if we get like the tiniest bit of snow.
Yeah. Well, so like I'm in Houston and we had snow in Houston last week, which is bonkers because it rarely ever snows in Houston. And it's like, I look at the month of January and it was like, we had school holidays. We were back in school, but it was a short week, introducing back in. Then like one of my kids had a stomach bug, and then next week was snow days. And then, Martin Luther King Day here in the US, they didn't have school. And then, this week we've got these conference days. I'm like, oh my gosh, are we ever going to school? Like, can we just have a normal week? And that is the reality of the juggle that all parents are doing.
Exactly.
And then when you throw in ADHD in the mix, it's like, I mean, I'm sure that there are so many parents listening being like, I didn't know that today was an early dismissal day until I got the reminder from the school that it was happening in an hour. Or if your kid's old enough to have a device and they're like, hey, where are you?
Yeah.
I'm waiting at the school to be picked up. And you're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
That is so much for us to juggle. But like being able to laugh about it with other parents, like, yeah, it's still hard. I still can't work on Thursday and Friday. But yet to have someone to engage over, like this community means so much. Especially when you have ADHD, to know it's not just you, you're not the only one struggling. It's so important for us to have that support system there to take care of us. Like that's why I do group coaching. So you can have moms around who get it and being like, yeah, I've totally been there when I didn't realize it was a half day at school, or I didn't realize that there was a permission slip due. And then I had to leave work to go drop off the permission slip because of course we couldn't just email it, like, whatever. It's like you need people around you to support you in that and laugh about it. And no, it's not just you. There are literally millions of us out here struggling with parenting and ADHD. So when it's not uniquely you, you're not broken, it's not a personal defect of yours, then you can start to put the systems in place to support you because it's not you.
Yes.
And that there are options available to be able to have support.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, like I just was just saying, really, I just kind of more or less been told that I have ADHD. I plan to get tested, but right now I'm like hyper focused to get the kids tested right now. So I've, of course, put myself a little bit further on the back burner.
Yeah.
But where was I going with this? See, this is why, like, I noticed, by the way, I'm really bad at doing panel interviews. ADHD, because I hyper focus on everybody's response, and I'm like, oh, it's my turn. What was the question?
Yes. Well, what you're saying is like there's so many times where we recognize that our kids are struggling, so we put them first, and then we're like, I'll deal with it later. Now, the good part about, I guess, if I can say this is a good part, you don't need an ADHD diagnosis to be able to look for support. Like it's not, unless you want to have medication, like, yes, you need to have a full diagnosis because you're working with the doctor. But even if you're suspecting and you're like early in the journey, the whole point of having the diagnosis, besides having medication, or if you need supports like in school with accommodations, like it's really for you. It's for you to know it's not me. I'm not making it up. It's really more of like a self-validation thing.
Yeah.
Like 80% of it is so that you can feel sturdy about it. But here's the thing. If you are listening to this and you're like, wow, this sounds really familiar, you don't have to have a piece of paper validate for you. Like you can just start listening to people that you trust. Like do your research. There's a lot of kooky people out there, but do your research and find the people who are like well regarded in their information and start learning from them. You can gain so much knowledge by looking for the resources that fit your brain. Like, my question is always to my clients, like, what's going to make this easier for you? We're not taking the lazy way out. We're figuring out like what makes sense for you. If this is easier to do it this way, let's make it happen. We don't have to struggle that hard. So you don't have to have, like, you don't have to wait for that piece of paper to tell you that you need assistance for you to say, let me start looking into these resources and see which ones work and try them out and asking questions. Yes, I always say everyone should get a diagnosis, and should is a word I use rarely, mostly because people with ADHD tend to have so many other things that come along with it. Like, we rarely show up with ADHD only. It's usually ADHD and dyslexia or dysgraphia or anxiety or depression or autism or chronic illness or PMDD. Like, there's just so many things that tend to be friends with ADHD. So I recommend to get that, because that specialist will, assuming that they're good at their job, will be able to recognize all those things, and they can start treating you as a whole person and all the different layers of it. But you don't have to have that in order to start making your life easier for you.
No, I love that. And reach out. There's your community that you have, but just anyone listening, like, start asking or just looking for people who have ADHD. I find like I feel like I'm just understood when I hang out with those people who have ADHD, who are moms too, because I felt like I was always trying to like fit into the mold. And I just didn't understand why I didn't fit into the mold. And it's like, well, because I have ADHD and I just think differently, and or I'm doing things so differently that some people are just like, well, that's not that it's bad, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, and I always tell people when they become friends with me, I'm like, listen, if you like me and you think I'm funny or I'm relatable, I'm like, you should just go get checked, because we tend to flock together. So like, that's why so many people with ADHD tend to marry people who also have ADHD or also have autism. Like, we're looking for our people. So we tend to be clumped together. And that's why, like, whenever somebody's like, oh, isn't everybody ADHD these days? I'm like, oh, you have a family full of undiagnosed people, don't you? Because you think this is normal. This is not, this is not normal. Like, it is a very different way of thinking, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's, we're talking 5, like I said, I think it's closer to 10% of the population. So if you're listening to me and you're like, wow, doesn't everybody think like that? No, ma'am, we do not. Not everybody is like this. And that is a clue for you to be like, hey, this is probably worth looking into. That it's worth it. Check it out. Like, the worst you're going to do is read, like, say you go grab I have a free checklist of ADHD symptoms that tend to show up in women or in inattentive types, with like real life examples of this is what it actually could look like. It's, again, everybody's different, but like, when you say you're disorganized, being disorganized as a mom is different than, like, it's not just, oh, I couldn't find my keys. It's, I haven't found my keys 4 times this week, and then I also found them in the refrigerator, and also like in the bag in the back seat of the car, rolled under the car seat, and they were there for 3 days and I didn't locate them. Like, that's a very different than, oh, I misplaced my keys when I was at my friend's house and forgot to grab them on the way out. Like, it's a different thing. So that's why I have the checklist. But like, go look at the checklist, download it, figure out, like, does this sound like you? And if it does, great. Now you have a list of symptoms that you can say when you go to your doctor and they're like, well, how are you disorganized? You can be like, well, here's some real life examples. I have left the laundry in the washing machine 4 times and have rewashed it 4 times because I keep forgetting to put it in the dryer. It's like, yes, some people forget the laundry sometimes. If you forget the laundry pretty much every time you do it, that's a different struggle. And I think that, like, that the issue with a lot of pieces of ADHD is that people struggle with these things and they're common. Everybody forgets things sometimes. Everybody loses track of things. Everybody has days where they're off. But when this is something that is persistently causing issues in your life, it's keeping you from holding down your job. It's keeping you from having a healthy relationship. It's keeping you from being I'm like, I don't need, I'm like, ooh, word choice, not irresponsible, but it's like you set a budget, but then you just keep buying things and you're like, I don't know why I do this to myself. Like when it's affecting you in those kind of ways where you're like, I have a plan. I don't understand why it's not coming together. I'm doing all the things. I read all the Pinterest posts. I read the books. I listened to the podcast. I saw the specialist, and yet still it's a mess. I'm not making any headway. That's when it tells you like, hey, this isn't just a regular old, like regular people issue. This is something that's really affecting you day in and day out. And it's time to ask for help when it's affecting you to that level. You don't have to struggle that hard to be able to do the basic functions. There's ways to make it easier.
When you're talking about that, like my brain, all I can hear is my husband being like, I told you to put the keys in one spot. The amount of times I'm like, I did. Oh, maybe I didn't. Here it is underneath my jacket.
Yeah. And like my keys are gigantic. I have all the keychains on there. It's, you know, the car key, and I have like one of those like tile GPS things, and my like, you know, my dad's house key and my in-laws house key. Like it's not a key ring. It's like a key explosion. But why? Because I can find it in my purse because it's gigantic. And that's part of the reason it's gigantic. So when I open my bag, I can spot the keys every time. And if I set them somewhere, they are noticeable. It's not just one doodad amongst the chaos. It's like, oh yeah, there's my mountain of like, it has a fidget doodad on there, like one of those poppy fidget things. I mean, it's got all kinds of stuff on there because I can see it. I won't lose it. And it's like such a nuisance. Like they're going to look at it and be like, those are Patricia's keys. We know those are Patricia's keys because they're huge. And so it's like these silly little things where we can, you know, I can't tell you how many times my husband's like, why don't you take some stuff off that? I'm like, no, I need to be able to find it in my bag. And that's okay. I am okay with carrying around an extra like 0.5 pounds of stuff on my keychain because I'll find it and I won't lose it. And those little things that we can do to support ourselves are worth it every time.
100%. I need to get more on my keychain. I've randomly lost a few things along the way. I was actually noticing it was quite late. I'm like, oh, no wonder I can't find these things anymore. But I used to have like all the things on there. My husband would make fun of me for it. But I'm like, no, because I could find it easily because it gets lost so easily. And we have a system now for myself. So I know where to find it, but I don't really tend to follow the system sometimes.
Yeah. And it takes us much longer to develop habits. I know there's always that saying of like, oh, 21 days to a habit. That first of all, that's not true for most people. It's really like closer to like 40 to 60 days. And people with ADHD need even more than that. Like we need lots of time to create habits. Yes. And it's not like you are not a personal failure because you didn't get down the key habit in the first 2 weeks. Like you are possible, like you are capable of habits for sure. How do we make them doable?
Yes. We're almost at time. Maybe you can share with everyone how to reach you, maybe your services. I have your information here going as well while we've been chatting.
Awesome. So I'm the same info everywhere. It's motherhood in ADHD. And if you Google my name, Patricia Sung, I will come up. But there on my website, I have a ton of free resources. So I mentioned the checklist already of ADHD symptoms, but I have a whole toolkit full of information that I have created over the years that is available for free. I do coaching both one-on-one and in groups. And I host a retreat in person for moms who have ADHD every October. Let's see what else. Because I have ADHD, there's a long list here. And I also have self-paced courses that you can do online to help you with time management and daily planning and working with your energy cycles and how to stop anxiety. There's just a wealth of information. So definitely go to the website, check it out, and listen to the podcast. It's Motherhood and ADHD, and you will see that there are other people. It's not just you.
I love that. And so anyone, if they're looking, I put the checklist within the comments. So just take a look in there. You should be able to see it. And then I'll just double check through after the show that the links are all accessible for everyone as well. But well, thank you, Patricia, for coming on today. It was such a pleasure. I heard your name throughout the Vine, and I was like, I started researching you more, and I was like, I just have to have her on the show. So I was super excited to have you.
Thank you so much. Really, this is a long time coming. We had this on the books for a while, but thank
Yeah.
you for giving people with ADHD a voice to speak out. And um, we can do really great things, even when you have a learning disability. We are very capable
Mhm.
of being successful. And thank you for giving us space to do that.
Well, thank you again for coming on the show, and thank you for everybody listening. We are going to be tuning in live next week. I don't even know what Monday it is. Monday next week. Breaking norms, building dreams. With that, everyone, remember your journey is unique and your worth is unquestionable. Thank you.